I welcome everyone for joining this, as I call a dry run, and I will explain you why I call it a dry run. First of all, let me introduce with me, there is a Scott Young that many of you knows personally, and from the MBDS, there is Carter. So, and really, I appreciate the fact that you are here 10 o'clock in the morning, Eastern Standard Time. I see that some are based here, some abroad, to talk about this new initiative, which is an initiative designed to maintain the connection between MBDS, our alumni, and our students. So let me give you a little bit of an agenda. I will talk, I have a brief introduction, not more than 5 minutes, and then I will let Scott deliver the talk to all of you. But I want to go through why it is important, is strategically important for us to connect with the alumni and the students. What indication gave us the recently organized event, a survey 2023 summary, explaining a little bit what MBDS will be. It's a baby for the moment, and then of course leave the talk to Scott Young. I hope that everyone is listening to me well. So let me start. First of all, maintaining a connection with the MBDS alumni student is a strategic priority for us. I discussed it a lot with Professor Bicchieri, with our Dean Nora Lewis, and of course, we want to be in contact with all of you. Why? Because the alumni give a global perspective of behavioral science around the world in different industries, in different organizations. I mean, you come here with a professional background, you stay with us for 1 year, then you go back to the world working really all across the world in different industries. We want to have your perspective. Another reason is, of course, because the alumni represent the base of our global network. And also, the alumni are a reference for our current students and also for prospective candidates. Talking with the current cohort number 7, they really appreciate every time we organize an event and the connection between alumni and them. And also for prospective candidates. Actually, in this period, we are selecting the candidates for the future course. I think that the alumni, it's a reference point. Great. So during fall last year, actually, we organized 3 events, May, September, and December. They were very well attended. We had a good interaction between students, faculty, industry affiliates. So it went well. But of course, there is a problem. And the problem is the physical limitation, because we were limited to the alumni that live close to Penn campus. And we want to expand our reach. To give you an idea, we have approximately 350 alumni over the world, and they told us that they want to be connected. And the answer was, we need to add to the in-person networking event that will continue even in 2024, some virtual events. So in December, we asked 6 questions to all our alumni. First, topics, which speakers they would like to see, the frequency of the talk, the delivery method, the duration, and the time of the day. So very basic operational questions. And I want to thank every one of you that answered it, because this gave us some ideas, some support to plan, implement the talk format. In terms of, first of all, in terms of operational answer, we were reassured. They would like to see, you would like to see a speaker or a panel mixing academia and industry. Academia, one vision, industry, and other vision. You suggested an MBDS talk every quarter, so not frequent, but certainly not one per year. Synchronous and asynchronous. Some of you is able to join today. Some prefer to see the record. 40 minutes duration, 45 minutes duration, including Q&A, and starting at 10 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. This allows alumni from Asia, Europe, and USA, including the Pacific coast, to join. And so this was reassuring. In terms of topics, I try to summarize here the topics in 5 main categories. Of course, artificial intelligence. This is the number one. Almost all of you said they want to discuss about artificial intelligence and the impact that will have or is having on behavioral science. Second group of topics is behavioral science applications. So what are the practical applications, the evolution of the consultancy in terms of tools, rates, some industry experience or case studies, opportunity to join advisory board, including volunteering, the second topic. Third topic, careers in behavioral science. So what careers exist in a field that is evolving on a weekly or monthly basis. So an academic path, consulting, industry, what type of industries. And the second bullet point on careers, what industries are looking for, what the industry are looking for in the job applicants. Expertise in data management, expertise in survey design, expertise of behavioral science in general. Then another topic, this I will discuss with the foundation of behavioral science, so the ethics, social impacts, and emerging theory. So this is more academic related. And one point, miscellaneous, and this everybody talk about networking. So with this idea, so we want to stay connected to the alumni. The fact that is a strategic priority, the fact that we sent a survey and we were reassured in terms of operational details and some idea of content, we launched into this project. Now, again, I want to thank all of you for attending, but I want really to thank Scott because I said, Scott, I don't know how it will go. We want to start today to see from every aspect how it will go. And that's why I called Dry Run. And I have to say that Scott, which again I thank, is here today with us with a real open mind, presenting an interesting talk. And this is a starting point. Again, it's a starting point. We need your support for the future. So for this, I hope that everything is clear. I stop sharing my screen. Now, Scott, it's your time. You have the floor. Thank you very much, everyone, for the attention.
Thank you so much, Marco. It's really a pleasure to be here, and I don't mind at all being a guinea pig of sorts for this initiative. I'm actually honored to be invited. And I'd say it's very nice to see some familiar faces as well in terms of the folks who are participating today. Really what I was thinking I would do today is share some thoughts on a topic that's very much on my mind. And in fact, an area that I wrote 2 blogs / short articles in the last month or 2, which I can certainly point you to. And then hopefully spark some conversation and some input and some questions as well. So with that said, I'll jump in. Just very quickly, for those of you I haven't had a chance to meet over the last year or two, um, this is just a little bit of my own background. As you can see, I spent the majority of my career in consumer or shopper insights. And I like to say that's where I saw this gap between what people said and what they actually did, usually in terms of purchase patterns, which really got me excited and engaged in behavioral science. And when that, a lot of the literature started coming out, perhaps 10 to 15 years ago, it really, really resonated with me and ultimately helped me decide to shift my career in the second half of my career. For the last 6 to 7 years, I've been focused on behavioral science consulting, initially with a friend and mentor named Eric Singler at the BVA Group, doing consulting primarily to private sector organizations. And then the last 2 years or so at the Behavioral Insights team, leading private sector engagement, but also getting involved more broadly. And in fact, I just left a full-time role at BIT at the turn of the year, hopefully to spend more time doing things like this and engaging with folks like yourselves. And in terms of what I wanted to share today, is really some thoughts about where we stand as a field, trying to be honest in terms of both our accomplishments, but also some of the challenges that we face, particularly with an emphasis on the private sector, which is, obviously my background, but really an area that I feel like there's just so much opportunity for us to do so much good. And we can talk more about that as we go. So if I have to summarize it, and of course it's a very broad analysis here, I do think there's an awful lot to feel very, very good about, and that the field has clearly entered um, the broader conversation, and I think influenced both business leaders and individuals in many ways. And here, obviously, I'm just showing really a cross section of all the amazing work that's going on, and really maybe to emphasize the fact that it has really reached the mainstream in many ways, thanks to people like Adam Grant and Katie Milkman and many, many others. When we turn to the business or private sector side, I think we can also pretty fairly say that we've made at least an inroads in, I think, three primary industries or sectors. Financial services, where behavioral science is consistently being applied, I think, to look at issues around financial decision making and so forth. And we'll talk obviously more about that in a moment. Healthcare, where behavioral science thinking, again, is, I think, permeated in terms of helping people navigate through the healthcare system and perhaps make better decisions for themselves. And I think the third sector where we see pretty somewhat consistent levels of activity is the insurance sector, which I find a really fascinating one in the sense that it's probably the sector where incentives align the best, in the sense that, if people are living healthier lives, making safer decisions, that's generally speaking a positive for the bottom line of insurance companies. So they have an incentive to really apply a lot of these tools and help people in that way. And again, probably for that reason, there has at least been some adoption and engagement there as well. And this is not to say that we don't find work going on elsewhere. There are certainly individual companies that are making efforts in different sectors beyond this. But I would say the lion's share of work is going on here, and at least in my experience. And if I kind of go perhaps a little deeper, in terms of what I'm seeing, again, I think we can look at it as glass half full or half empty. There certainly are some companies that have made commitments to behavioral science in terms of developing internal units, whether they call them behavioral science teams or nudge units or something else. They are primarily in the sectors that I mentioned, and they certainly range from, 20 to 30 people, very robust teams for a few companies, but probably the more typical that we see is smaller groups of anywhere from 4 to 6 people, or even individuals who are the behavioral science point person for large organizations. And as you see, if I have to generalize, I would say the majority are more customer facing, probably for financial reasons. That's where we see revenue. So helping advisors, financial advisors, maybe looking at issues around risk, things of that nature. Beyond those teams, really almost every behavioral science consultant you speak with will say they're never quite sure where the next phone call or the next email or inquiry is coming from. It feels, frankly, somewhat random across a variety of functions and usually driven by individuals who have maybe taken a program like this or maybe read a book or two and gotten excited and interested and are looking to make something happen in their function. But with all that said, at least I feel as though we've really just scratched the surface. And there are, whereas in the public sector, usually you're looking at very well-defined RFPs coming from governments or perhaps from philanthropies. That's really not the case in the private sector. It's much more organic. Again, much more about individuals trying to make things happen. And that's what I'd like to talk more about, I think, today, which is, where can we see some of these things happen and how can we facilitate it? Knowing that in many cases, folks are fighting a battle, really, to persuade others in their organization to secure funding and so forth. And just to kind of wrap up an initial synopsis, I do think we have to be honest and say that there are challenges and growing pains out there. While I mentioned that I think we have some consistent sectors or industries that are kind of the hub of our work, I don't think we can say there's really a consistent set of use cases right now where organizations think, if I have this kind of challenge, this is a behavioral science challenge. And that's something that I think we need to keep thinking about and talking about. And there have been some challenging situations. I'm personally aware of at least 3 organizations that just in the past year basically gave up on their behavioral science function. Mostly due to internal financial pressures. But with that said, certainly a concern that, are we making a strong enough case that behavioral science is really mission critical and not something nice to have? And certainly there have been issues that I'm sure you're all aware of, mostly tied to academia and data and so forth over the past year. My personal feeling is that that those are probably not the source of my second bullet point. But I think perhaps they may give an excuse or an opportunity for folks who are looking for a reason to cut costs and so forth to perhaps be able to act on that. So again, I think we're at a crossroads of sorts. And I think, as I mentioned, that there's so much more we can do in terms of really applying behavioral science for good and helping organizations take advantage of the learning and the broader understanding. But there's a long way to go and certainly challenges. And that's really what I want to speak about today, which is, how can we make this happen? How can we reach the next level in the private sector in particular? And I kind of boil it down here to 3 interconnected challenges. First, where should we be focusing our efforts? I do think it's a little bit of a double-edged sword that, behavioral science can be applied to so many different topics and issues and challenges that can work against us as well in terms of not having, again, clear use cases or ways for people to think of us. I also mentioned, I think focusing our efforts is also about not just functions, but also specific projects. And I'll try to speak briefly to that. Secondly, how do we tell the story? How do we engage colleagues who may be open in some sense, but maybe not as engaged as we are, and have a lot of other things on their mind, a lot of other competing factors for attention, for resources, etc., which really ties to that third point. So let's jump in. And I'll start with this first challenge of where should we focus our efforts? And I don't really present this in terms of presenting it as the only three areas. I'm guessing almost all of you can look at this and maybe come up with your fourth or fifth or sixth bullet point on this list. But these are three areas that I've been engaged with in one form or another through my work at BVA and BIT, and really areas that I see a lot of potential and opportunity. And I'd love to see us move forward. And I'll speak briefly to each and maybe try to share some of my thinking behind it. First, consumer protection. And, I just pulled some of these facts or factoids, perhaps. Um, and there are many others, of course, out there. But, the main point here is that this is an area that organizations, particularly financial services organizations, are spending a fortune on trying to combat because fraud costs them a lot of money. You see that bullet point, there's not only the immediate costs of refunds and so forth and labor tied to it, but legal issues, recovery expenses, and so forth. So again, first and foremost, this is a problem, and it's an acknowledged problem, and it's a problem that organizations are spending money against. But we might argue it's not necessarily solving are they spending the money as well as they could? Are they solving the problem as well as they could? And of course, the problem itself is evolving as folks get more sophisticated in trying to come up with scams and et cetera. Second area, and maybe one that's less intuitive, is compliance. Almost all, certainly financial services organizations, again, but many other really all companies have compliance functions, right? Hotlines, et cetera, to essentially ensure or help ensure that their employees are following regulations, anything from legal regulations to company policies. So this is an entrenched function within organizations. And again, an area that a lot of money is being spent, but not necessarily effectively. I'm obviously just showing you a headline from a Harvard Business Review article, which goes into a lot more detail here. And in fact, we did a webinar a bit around this topic, which was quite interesting. And I'm sure you could find the recording if you're interested. But again, an area where a lot of resources are being spent, but yet we still see malfeasance, we still see, scandals, we still see a lot of challenges. And then third, and maybe most obviously, I think the most obvious in my mind, is people. And you can look at people on multiple dimensions, of course. But just to quickly highlight three, enormous spending around diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives. And I'm not sure if you're all familiar with it, but there have been studies that have essentially shown that a lot of the training around DEI has not really been very effective in actually leading to results within organizations. And training itself, an enormous area, right? And I think we all know somewhat through personal experience that training often doesn't stick. People nod their heads, but months later, weeks later, it doesn't necessarily lead to behavior change or consistent behavior change. And wellness, an area that I've done work on, many companies, certainly large companies, are spending a lot of money trying to help their employees, both physical and mental health, but participation rates relatively low. So kind of wasted resources, wasted money, and of course, not as positive outcomes in terms of people's health. So again, I could have probably picked others, but these three areas all intrigue me. And I've probably already spoken to these, but I think they serve as a nice checklist in terms of saying, where should we be looking for opportunities? And I think first and foremost, it is about challenges that are indeed recognized and that organizations are already committing, have already acknowledged and are already spending against. But as per the second point, maybe not seeing the outcomes that they would like. And then thirdly, and importantly, and maybe three and four are kind of, connected, I think there are areas where behavioral science has an awful lot to say and to be able to make a contribution. And Often I think in terms of intent to action gaps, situations where most people at least would like to do the right thing. They would like to take advantage, to live more healthily if it's employee wellness we're speaking about, to follow the rules for the most part, if we're talking about compliance, etc. And of course, certainly most people are not, would not like to fall victim to scams and so forth. So, situations where it's not a question of convincing, perhaps, but really more facilitating desired behaviors. And of course, areas where we know um, from proven experience that, often the answer is not about changing financial incentives or otherwise, but small changes in process, interventions, et cetera, can make a difference. So, all three of these areas, and again, probably others as well, to me, all kind of share these characteristics, which make them, I think, macro areas that we can really do a lot more. And, how can we make a difference? Well, I think we can answer this question in multiple ways. But just to give you a few, a few slightly more specific answers, helping people act less impulsively, right? Stopping and thinking before they click, which is interesting, right? Because behavioral science, we talk so much about um, avoiding sludge and making things easier for people, but in some cases, it's more the opposite, right? We want to, introduce some friction and get people to move away from automatic behaviors and stop and think before acting. Again, simply making people aware of heuristics, particularly in the financial world, overconfidence bias, et cetera. I mean, there's so many that we could list. And simply making them aware of it and giving them some simple tools to help improve their own decision making around investing, perhaps, but also around other kinds of decisions for themselves. And can also apply across to healthcare and so forth. As I mentioned, in the compliance world, certainly there's a small percentage of people who are truly negative actors and they are looking to steal and scam and do bad things. But the vast majority of people, are looking to follow the rules. And it's often that those rules are too complicated, um, and habits and so forth get in the way. And again, there's nice opportunities to integrate. And with training, I think we often find the answer is kind of that hot state, cold state issue, right? Where people are, learning in a cold state, so to speak. And then later on, at the moment of decision, the hot state, it doesn't translate, and they just revert to past behaviors and again, don't adopt the new behaviors. So, how can we make training more impactful? How can we make it stick? And it's often by creating that emotional or visceral feeling, that hot state that's more similar to the actual experience. So again, a lot of ways that I think we can take some of the tools and really start to make a difference. Another way to answer the same question, is just to kind of look across the variety of ways that we can make a difference. And this is actually pulled from a presentation where we were looking at financial decision making. But I think it's just a nice reminder of, all of the different mechanisms by which we can intervene and potentially encourage or facilitate people making better decisions for themselves. And then I guess a third way I would answer the same question is by thinking in terms of a few kind of structural avenues to make a difference. First and foremost, I think it's really coming together as a community and supporting these organizations that have made commitments to internal behavioral science teams and essentially helping make sure that they're successful. And the logos you see just speak to, three of the organizations that have made bigger commitments in this area. And, I think there's a lot of opportunity. I think the success and the proven and visible success of these organizations and others is really what will help create momentum for the field, and that we all kind of have a stake in them being successful, and us contributing in different ways from the academic world, but also from consultancies and so forth, to help share knowledge and, again, set them up for success. I also think it's important to take these functional leads in some of these areas I mentioned, but perhaps others, um, and really partnering with them, and again, giving them some of the tools to help them be successful in what can be an uphill battle in their organizations, to introduce new thinking, new processes, and so forth. And then thirdly, in some of these areas, when I think of things like anti-fraud efforts and so forth, there's really a nice opportunity to bring public and private together. Often regulators in fields have very similar objectives, and organizations do as well. For example, in the world of insurance, um, encouraging honesty, both in filling out initial applications and filing claims for insurance. Those are issues that are really of benefit to the entire industry, not to mention the regulators. So again, sometimes rather than hoping that one company will make a huge investment to try to push things forward, maybe the more viable alternative is to bring different players in a sector together. And sadly, today I don't really have time to dive too deeply into case studies, just in the interest of time. But one that you can certainly find that's in the public domain that is an example of this third element, is work that Behavioral Insights team did with the regulators in France, and bringing together folks to look at this issue of online scams, and again, to try to help develop knowledge base and data that could potentially help the whole sector counter this challenge. And I think that's a model that can be replicated in a lot of different areas. So I've been speaking almost exclusively to, where do we focus our efforts in terms of issues and challenges and functions, right? But I did want to take it down a level as well, within HR, within compliance, et cetera. How do we think about, and how do we help these champions find the right projects, quote unquote? And here, I don't think this is a perfect model, but I think perhaps it's a good starting point of a checklist, for them to think about. Size and visibility of an opportunity. And importantly, how will it be measured? How do we know what success will look like? And are we thinking about that from the very beginning? Because if it's not measurable or not easily measurable, arguably it's not going to create the proof and the momentum that we might be looking for. Again, likelihood of success, of course, there's multiple factors around that, and perhaps some judgment, but I think this issue of intent to action gap, are we facilitating desired behaviors that people already would like, or are we trying to convince them or persuade them, is a good question to ask ourselves, and links to, success or likelihood of success. Feasibility, really important one. We all know that there are some interventions that arguably are on the easier side, both in terms of expense, but also in terms of the number of people we need to get behind it and to make it happen. And then there are others that are much more difficult, and we need, to engage multiple functions within an organization. We need to spend, et cetera, and thus it can be difficult. And of course, ethically. And we could probably do an entire presentation and speech about ethics and how to think about them. But to me, one of the easier models, at least a starting point, is to think in terms of win-win-win. And in fact, that's an area that I've written more about, and you're certainly welcome to find that in Behavioral Scientist. But very generally speaking, I think of win-win-win as is there something in it for the company? Often, ideally, is that tangible, either increased revenue or cost savings, but it can be other things. Secondly, is it a win for the people that we're impacting, of course, and whether that's employees or customers? Is it something they perceive as a win? Again, making life easier, helping them achieve their own goals, whether that's around financial or health or otherwise. And then, ideally, is it a win for society, which, can be a fuzzier one, but I think we can often align on larger goals, whether that's sustainability, whether that's gender equality, things of that nature, that we would argue are positive for society as a whole. So again, probably not a perfect model, and we can come up with more sophisticated ones, but I think a set of questions to ask ourselves and to help others in terms of saying, where should we focus our energy? What projects should we pursue if we're trying to apply behavioral science and create further momentum? And that really leads me to kind of the second half or last part of what I was hoping to speak with you about today, which is kind of turning it to the challenges. And this is a question I almost always try to incorporate within, presentations that I do, because I think it's really important to recognize that, we're kind of in a self-selecting crowd here, people who are excited about behavioral science, engaged in it, knowledge, and are becoming knowledgeable about it. But we have to realize that when we go into organizations, private sector companies, but others as well, governments, um, that we're going to be dealing with folks that don't have the same level of incoming excitement and knowledge, and that are busy, running their lives and running their divisions and budgets and so forth. And that we really need to think about that. And, those of you who have been out there, either within organizations or in consultancies, I'm guessing some version of these pushbacks might sound familiar to you. Yes, but that's really exciting, that's energetic, but I'm so busy. There's so many other things, all well and good, but nothing's going to happen. Which is, all too familiar, frankly. Going in, a lot of excitement and then no follow through. There's also the, we already do this, which is a danger of behavioral science becoming more popularized. It's very easy for people to grab onto one element of it, one idea, throw something out there, probably without real measurement or testing, and then declare that it didn't work, or just to move on to whatever's the latest and greatest. And that really concerns me, because, it's potential for organizations to, I think, misguidedly say that they've tried this and it's failed, and let's not put more energy against it. And then, of course, there's just the reality that we're competing for resources and budgets. So how do we address some of these things? Well, I dive into this more deeply in a recent article that you can find on the BIT, the Behavioral Insights team blog. But I think there's kind of these three interrelated challenges. One, the idea that while people like to think of themselves as open-minded, often by coming in with behavioral science, to some degree, it's an implied criticism or threat. You're basically telling me that whatever I have been doing isn't optimal. And of course, most people don't really want to hear that. So, how do we present behavioral science as a positive and not necessarily as a criticism or a potential threat to, a head of human resources or a head of operations or whatever it may be? Secondly, and I know I've alluded to this a few times today, but there's that lack of definition. We can be applied to everything, which, to some degree means we're applied to nothing. And how do we handle that and address that? And then again, thirdly, how do we address the inevitable budget challenge, right? That whose budget does this come from? What's going away if we're investing in, large, significant, well thought through behavioral science projects and initiatives? I don't, by the way, I'm not going to pretend that I have perfect answers to these. What I have perhaps to share is some thoughts and hypotheses, and things that have worked in some contexts. But, part of my goal in sharing some of this with you is to hear from others about how they've addressed some of these challenges. With that said, I think maybe first and foremost is really the idea of framing or presenting behavioral science. What is it, and how should business leaders think about it? And I do think the best analogy that I've come across is this idea of a way of looking at things, or a set of lenses. Um, and you can see some of the sub bullets around how I think about it and how I speak of it and what I emphasize. Um, but I think this is really important, because it kind of speaks, for one thing, it positions behavioral science more broadly and not just, again, as a tool, which may be the more common analogy, that it's a bunch of nudges or something along that nature. Um, but also, I think it's potentially a framework that allows us to present behavioral science as incremental and an additional source of value and an additional way of looking at things, which isn't necessarily saying that, again, what you've been doing is wrong. So maybe potentially a less threatening way to look at it as well. And kind of tied to that, three or four of the key points that I try to emphasize in presenting behavioral science to organizations. First and foremost, this isn't something additional. This isn't a new thing to worry about. This is a way of looking at the exact same, at the problems that are already keeping you up at night, and potentially helping you come up with different ways to address those challenges, or perhaps those opportunities, to be fair. So kind of tied to that, this isn't about replacing what you're doing. We're not telling you it's all been wrong. We're telling you there's an additional or a different way that might complement that and help you ultimately make greater progress on some of these challenges that have been persistent. And of course, it is important to emphasize, what is really compelling about behavioral science, I think, to both governments and business leaders is, the fact that due to what we're learning, often small changes in process, in environment, in context, in the way things are presented, choice architecture, those things can make a big difference. And that the answer isn't always, give people more money, more incentive, lower the price, whatever, very expensive answers. Often we can indeed come up with smaller interventions, smaller changes that have a disproportionately high impact. And of course, that's what's exciting. Um, so again, combining these messages, I think, is what's often really important in trying to address some of those more common pushbacks that we may find. And, I think there's often a tendency, to share the cool case study, the latest academic study that came out and so forth. But I do think that a lot of where I've seen traction is just sharing simple tools that allow people to immediately start applying some of this thinking to their own challenges. So, the East framework, probably the simplest thing out there, but arguably among the most effective, because, a very quick way to go from theory to start helping people really look at a challenge that they're already worried about, and start to think about it in a systematic way that brings in some principles. Or COM-B, again, not the most sophisticated model, and that's a good thing in the sense that it's a relatively easy one to grasp. And, you can spend a half hour with business leaders and start to give them an alternative or complementary way to start thinking about their challenges, and get them talking about what matters to them, and then applying a behavioral science lens to it. So finally we hit that last one, which is always the eternal challenge of all well and good, but how do we get funding? And again, I don't think there's a magic answer to this one, but I think there's a few things that we can think about and maybe use consistently. First off, and perhaps this can be applied to anything, but thinking less about the investment of a couple of $100,000 and more about the potential value. And literally getting to the point of, hey, we're not going to change everybody's behavior, but even if we get a modest percentage, what is the quantifiable benefit of that? Whether that's, again, cost savings or employee retention and health or whatever it may be. And if we can frame things that way, of course, I think we're more likely to be able to get funding. But a second point, maybe a little less obvious, I think we often default to the idea of thinking about behavioral science projects and behavioral science funding. And, let's get those couple 100,000 to do this, which almost inevitably means, what's going to go away, which is often the stumbling point. And instead, I think maybe thinking more about this in terms of, you're investing X million on training your employees. Can we integrate behavioral science in a way to make that investment more effective and more efficient? And of course, you can pick other things other than training. But essentially, the message of, hey, you already have these projects. Can behavioral science help these projects become more effective? And really maybe speaking to this broader point of, what does success look like? Is it building behavioral science teams and projects and functions, or is it really integrating ourselves more thoroughly? And I do think it's important to illustrate the process, because sometimes folks run with the nudge idea and run with the idea that this is an ideation tool. And if it's just thrown into that bucket, I think it ends up looking quite expensive. So emphasizing the process, the rigor, the measurement, even if organizations don't always follow through and have the time and the patience and the resources to do the full measurement, at least presenting this as a process and not just as magic. So I hope that was some good food for thought, and I didn't ramble too long. I see we have about 10 minutes on the back end here. And I'm really happy to hear some questions if you have them, or maybe they're just points or your own experiences tied to this, both this question of opportunities and where should we focus our energy and where can we make a difference. But then on the other side, also how do we successfully overcome some of the challenges, I think, the natural challenges we find in terms of presenting a new way of thinking and a new approach within business context. So I'll pause for breath and maybe a little water and just see if anyone would love to jump in with a quick question.
Sure. Scott, thank you so much. Definitely, it was well presented, at least for me, but I hope for everyone else, enriching because you give a frame. So in terms of, thank you so much. For the questions, yeah, we have a few minutes. If you can raise your hands and unmute yourself and ask the question directly to Scott. So this is the way to proceed. So yeah. Who wants to break the ice?
I'm also fine if people would like to type it into the chat as well, if for whatever reason they'd like to do that.
Okay.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Sorry, I can't find the raise my hand button, but I just want to quickly jump in and ask a question if that is okay.
Yes, please go right ahead.
Yeah.
And thank you.
So hi, my name is Michelle Wang. I graduated last December from MBDS program. So I've been working for almost a year. I am a management consulting management consultant. Now I work as an advisory within a civil engineering firm. So
Okay.
for our company, so the reason why I'm here today is it might be a little bit slightly different from my peers because I've been working for a while, and our company is recently thinking about or from the industrial information. I felt like the engineers are considering incorporate behavior science part into our business. The traditional engineering industry always using like very like logistically analysis by just based on based on facts, based on data, based on figures, and we are thinking about incorporating those social equity, social outcome, behavioral sciences kind of information into the work. And that is more of a color and context piece, a human piece into our work. So with that, I know it might be a little bit specific, but is there any do you see any opportunities for for traditional industries like engineer?
Yeah, I mean, thank you first off for breaking the ice. I do see opportunities certainly in the engineering world, and in fact, while I didn't mention it as a top sector, I've definitely had inquiries and some projects with folks in architecture, urban
Right.
world, real estate world,
Yeah.
sometimes around promoting sustainability, for example. I guess my relatively quick answer would be, what it sounds like you're implying is that maybe the organization is thinking about integrating additional metrics into its equations, in terms of where to invest or how to think about projects and so forth. Where perhaps it started with a certain set of, cost benefit, et cetera.
Yeah.
Now they're trying to think about different dimensions. My feeling is that, wherever those dimensions land, we should be thinking about how to speak to the way the company is approaching success, and start with the company's metrics, the company's language, and then ask ourselves, how can we help how can we help the organization make progress towards that objective? So, for example, often on the sustainability side, the organization has one way or another arrived at a set of goals, which may be quite daunting, that the chief sustainability officer and team are thinking about. And one of the things we do is really try to think about those goals systematically, go one by 1 through 10, and say to ourselves, which of these are really about changing human behavior? Either the behavior of end users or the behavior of our own employees and the decisions they make. And if we can get to that point and say, sustainability will be, driven forward by, these 5 changes in behavior, then I think we've started to reach a level where we can start to think about the right kinds of interventions, to encourage our project managers to look at something differently, or encourage, ultimately, our customers or end users to do something differently. But I think we have to kind of get to that level. And I don't think the answer is bringing behavioral science, so to speak, as much as starting with the way they're defining success, change, and then trying to work backwards. So I hope that's helpful. I'm sorry if I'm rambling a bit there.
No. I think yeah, it's definitely very practical. I mean, if it's an organization, if it's a corporate, especially in private sector, as we just said, then just profit is definitely the top priority.
Of course.
So yeah, we might not want to think about things from, like, oh, we're just gonna build another practice platform in our company, but just how can we maybe start from doing things from a smaller piece and doing the incremental change. So I definitely understand that, and thank you so much for the presentation, Scott. It's great to be back, by the way.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, Farah. I think we have question maybe for time. Sorry for one more question, if you wish so. See if someone has a question from Amarachi. Oh, yeah. Thank you, Amarachi.
Thank you for the kind words.
If there is a question, I think we have a couple of minutes.
Yeah, well, I can, as I'm waiting for another one, if there is another one, a question I do get often asked about and it may have tied to some of your points at the beginning, was just, what resources do I follow, and what kinds of opportunities might there be to get more engaged? And my quick answer is these four. Behavioral scientists as a great compendium of some of what's going on, particularly more towards some of the newest research in the field. Habit Weekly, which is what that HW stands for, which somewhat similar, but I think a little bit more private sector and business oriented. So I think a great newsletter to follow. Behavioral Insights team, of course, BIT publishes a lot of brief case studies and often some context in their site, as do many others, to be fair. And the one organization, and I'm a little biased here, but one that I'm involved with, which I think is a great opportunity for people to get engaged and network and connect with other people, is BESI, which was formerly Action Design Network, which you may be familiar with. And that's an organization really dedicated to connecting people with an interest in behavioral science. So I think a good one to connect with, maybe to meet other people facing similar challenges and to trade notes and ideas with. So I hope that's helpful.
Yeah, absolutely. Actually, thank you for mentioning this, because especially BC Zorak, most of you know, is really committed to relaunch. And personally, and as MBDS, I spoke to him, and I will see him tomorrow before his class on Friday, saying, yes, as MBDS, we are committed to support the relaunch of action design. Thank you very much, Scott, for reminding
Oh,
me.
no worries. My pleasure. Yes. And I should mention there are local chapters, including Philadelphia. But I also do a virtual global practitioners network as well, to allow people from anywhere to connect and with others. So if there is interest, you can certainly look it up through the site, but you can also reach out to myself, or if you know Zarek, he'd be very happy as well to point you. So I think that's one organization. Of course, there are others I can point you to as well. And just a final note, because I know we're right at the hour or just past it. Michael Halsworth has also been involved and is involved at MBDS. If you want to dive a lot deeper into some of the future of the field and challenges facing it, the manifesto is certainly an amazing resource and a very detailed one. A little different angle than I spoke about today. And finally, I just want to say I'm always happy to speak with folks individually about whatever it is that's on their mind, and hopefully point them in the right direction towards resources and others in the field. So please feel free to reach out to me, whether it's LinkedIn or email, and you can find other articles as well through Medium. So thank you, Mark. I hope it was helpful. I certainly enjoyed it. I hope folks got a little value out of it today.
Yeah, thanks, Scott. Really, I close here. It's a beginning, as I said at the beginning. I think it's a good beginning in terms of also from the practical point of view, everything. I want to thank all of you that you joined. Again, Scott, thank you for this open mind. Stay tuned, because we have a lot of new initiative to stay connected with all of you. I wish you good evening, good rest of the day. And again, I hope to stay in contact with you. Bye. Bye, everyone.